The internet loves this gun because it's a 2011 style gun with no metal injection molded parts, but my experience was very lukewarm. This is not a negative review, but a bunch of you will get upset about it for me not loving it as much as you do. This is the Military Armament Corporation DS9, and the review starts now. Welcome back to the Humble Marksman channel. I'm David, and this is the MAC 9 DS or MAC DS9. It's got one of these like Star Trek, acronym type names, so I'm sure I'll screw it up multiple times in the video. What's interesting about this gun is the spec comes from a company based out of Tennessee, but it's executed by the company Thesis, which is based out of Turkey. So this is a Turkish 2011 style pistol, similar to the Thesis, but to a different spec. Now, I purchased this gun off the internet. I used one of those deal buying sites where you can get the guns for absolute rock bottom pricing, and I paid less than $900 for this gun in the early second quarter of 2024. Now, there is a whole lot to like about this gun, and we're going to get into all of that, and we're going to get into the stuff that I found that was just kind of typical for a gun of this price point. But first, I need to give a shout out to my dads. Guys, I need you to dad harder than you have ever dadded, and I mean be the best dad you can absolutely be. And I'll support you in embarrassing your wife and children with this. This one actually comes from a commenter. It was a particularly good one. So my buddy was asking me the other day, he's like, hey, what are two things that contain water? And I was like, well, damn. See? I do want to give a quick shout out to my supporters over on Locals and Patreon. You guys are awesome. I enjoy getting into the comments with you. A lot of my video ideas come from the interactions with my patrons and local supporters. So let's quickly touch on this stuff. You're going to know a lot of this stuff, but this is a 2011 Commander style gun, which means it's a 4¼ inch barrel, which is not a 5-inch 2011, which is sort of the proper 2011. For a 9mm gun, the 4¼ ones are a little bit more lively than the 5-inch ones, but they're also more balanced, and I appreciate the stability that they come with. So talking about what makes this gun stand out from its peers at the $1,000 or less price point, it comes with an aluminum magwell. The grip module is polymer, as you would expect. It's got a very generous memory bump on the grip safety. None of the small parts are metal injection molded. I took the gun apart far enough for me to be satisfied there were none, which is basically pulling the safeties, pulling the hammer strut, looking at the firing pin stop, the slide stop, all that kind of stuff. I didn't pull the sear and the disconnector at that point. I just kind of trusted that this was going to be a full steel gun, and it is. And having those tool steel parts is really important because those will keep their setting for a very, very long time. They're very durable. The metal injection molded parts will fail, but that failure window is pretty high. Most people won't even get at it. For instance, I've broken a metal injection molded MB safety in about 15,000 rounds and associated dry fire with that. Whereas I've had another gun where I had a metal injection molded slide stop and it broke before I even got the gun to the range. So your mileage may vary. So none of that is the problem here if you like the settings. Like this comes with a 5-pound trigger. The trigger pull is 5 pounds. It has an aluminum trigger shoe, and it is a long trigger shoe, and to the point where I have size XL glove wearing hands. I'm 6'4" and big dude. I can't get this finger on the trigger as much as I'd like to control it. So it affected my accuracy with the pistol. It affected how I shot at speed. It was a strange choice to put a straight trigger with what I would consider a long profile out of the box, when most of the population probably doesn't have enough trigger finger to support a trigger that long. The frame right here, that's the frame, is steel, which is honestly my favorite spec. I prefer steel 2011 guns. I don't like the aluminum ones as much. The AMB safety, as you can see there, is an excellent design. It has very positive retention. It is a very well fit and a very functional safety. I like the way the safety is set up quite a bit. And the slide cuts on the gun, it does have a Browning high power cut at the front of the gun with a massive bull barrel, which is what I like to see. A full length hollow guide rod. Hollow guide rod's an interesting choice, but that's what they did. And the gun is optic ready via a plate system, and it comes with an RMR. Now, it does have the ability to co-witness, but it does not come with co-witness sights. So if you want co-witness sights, you're going to end up springing for new sights. We're going to talk more about that in a bit. So all in all, on paper, this gun is really awesome. It's all the stuff that you want to see on a 2011 pistol, but the execution's just not where it should be. And I'll tell you about that, but first I want to talk to you about Warbird eye protection. Sometimes you need people to know you know all the words to kickstart my heart. Sometimes you just need to place your wife's order at Starbucks and not really stand out too much.
Whether you want to blend in or stand out, you still need to keep them precious eye holes safe. Visit warbirdpro.com and save 10% with code HUMBLE.
All right, guys, now I keep up with all of the 2011 forums and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, the competition shooter guys really want this to be a good gun. You know, the Reddit 2011 board wants this to be a good gun. And it feels like people need this gun to perform like on the level of a staccato. And what I found in my experience with the gun on the range is that it does not perform at the level of a staccato. And I'll support all that with video footage. So I'm going to start with the most egregious stuff, which all comes down to reliability. Now, the gun was taken out properly lubricated, and I still had 3 stovepipes.
All right, that's probably about 120 rounds in or so.
Another stovepipe, friends.
And probably 5 or 6 failures to feed, like the round would just hang up on the feed ramp.
Fail to feed. Uh-oh.
This one was weird. I have not had this problem at all in any hammer-fired gun ever, but using factory ammo, I had a light strike.
Right, this is the round from the light strike. Let's see if it's a bad round or if it's... Yeah, it went.
And if you look at the primer hit, it's a little bit off center. I suspect that the round wasn't quite fully centered in the barrel. Like, I think it had a delayed fail to feed, which led to a not out of battery, but, you know, close to it primer hit, which just seated the cartridge fully in the chamber, and that's why it got a light strike. That's just my conjecture. I'm not sure. And another thing that is pretty much classic for a sub $1,000, you know, 2011 style gun is that the extractor is not tensioned properly. If you see the gun, you'll see kind of erratic ejection. Most of it goes to the 5 or 6 o'clock, but I was getting some that would go forward to about 2 or 3 o'clock, which means that I was probably having some go back at 6 o'clock, colliding with the optic and creating stovepipes. So that is a pretty typical thing. Like, you don't get a good extractor tune without paying for it. So that was the issue that I was seeing there. The other thing is that the gun springing is very heavy. Like, the recoil spring is what I would consider a pound or 2 heavier than what would be sort of like an optimum 2011 spring. So the springing is kind of heavy, and I think that that was leading to sort of some of the issues that the gun was having with the magazines feeding the ammunition properly. The gun wasn't staying open long enough for the next round to come up into the chamber. It was kind of slamming forward prematurely and jamming the round on the feed ramp. I do think just simply swapping the recoil spring for a lighter recoil spring, you know, just a pound or 2, would probably make that issue go away. As far as round counts and how it was broken in, I put over 400 rounds on this gun. I don't really keep count, other than I know for a fact that, you know, one session I took it out and didn't film, fired 100 rounds, just kind of getting an optic zero, getting a feel for the gun. And then the next time out, I fired well over 300 rounds. And because it was having such heartache with the AAC 124 grain pills that I was putting down the gun, I ended up pivoting onto a box of Igman 124 grain, which has been fantastic stuff in every gun I've shot it in, as well as some Federal Syntec 130 grain PCC loads, which usually run stuff pretty well.
Flashlights!
And at the time I made the pivot, I also reapplied more oil. And as long as the gun was dripping wet with oil and had excellent slide velocity, just due to an abundance of oil, the gun ran fine. When it was properly lubricated without oil gushing out the back of the gun is when I was having the issues. So as long as the gun is very, very well lubricated, like generously lubricated, that I don't think you'll have any issues. While I was out there, I did test some hollow points just to see if they would feed. They fed fine, so there's that. That reliability stuff, let's assume that that's all solved, you get a good one and all that. I still don't think that this pistol is as good as some of the pistols that cost more. And it's almost as if somebody understands what the specs should be, but doesn't understand how they should be. And we'll start with the grip traction. The grip traction on this gun, I can say unequivocally, full stop, is the slickest 2011 grip I have ever held. The traction is pretty much just like ceremonial. It doesn't really provide bite or traction, including the checkering on the front strap and the mainspring housing of the gun. Doesn't really do anything. In fact, it is slippery. In the high summer with sweaty hands, I suspect and expect that this gun will move around a lot. Next, as we mentioned, is the trigger shoe. I was not getting typical 2011 performance from this gun because I couldn't manage the trigger. In precision shooting, it's so long that, you know, as the gun would recoil, I would readdress the trigger, and it's just a longer trigger shoe than what I'm used to, and this is definitely a shooter input on the gun. I think a lot of people are going to struggle with the trigger shoe that they decided to put on the gun. Next, this is a 2011 style gun. For most people, this gun is going to fill the, you know, range toy, target shooting, home defense style pistol, and they kind of are blending the lines with that a little bit, trying to be this like hybrid sort of tactical thing with the co-witness sights. The problem with the co-witness sights is that they don't co-witness past this. You see the Siley Wolf Pro optic that I have mounted on the gun. The rear sight just very barely, which is a low deck height optic. Just, I'm not talking like a lower quarter co-witness, I'm talking about like a lower 16th co-witness. The sights simply aren't tall enough. And by the presence of the sights at the rear of the gun, it pushes the optic forward. So if you want to use a big window optic that has like a cowl, like an SRO that hangs forward of the front of the optic plate, you can't, because it gets over the ejection port. I looked at putting the Swamp Fox Justice 2 on this. I looked at putting the Siley Bull optic or potentially the Ghost optic on there. I looked at the Gideon Optics Omega for this gun. None of them will work because the front of the optic hangs over the ejection port, which creates reliability issues on a gun that already has reliability issues. The trigger pull weight is set up at 5 pounds. Even Springfield Armory is coming in at about 4 pounds on the guns that they're putting out the door. It's about a pound too heavy for what I would consider a single action only gun with a viable trigger spec. The gun, you know, it has the standard like hitch on the disconnector that you'll see kind of back there at the rear of the stroke of the slide. So that's pretty typical for a gun that costs less than $1,000. They don't tend to smooth out the disconnector any. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that this gun has a magwell, so not all base plates are going to work with this magwell.
It doesn't like that base pad from Terran, and it had a fail to feed.
I did notice that my 17-round Duramags that had the Terran Tactical base plate on it for, you know, being dropped on concrete did not lock in this gun. Like the magwell won't let them in. So that's something to be aware of on any gun that you have, is that the base plates may affect the function with magwell. It fits all the 2011 holsters that I tried it in. It basically is squared away from that point, so they did a good job making sure the gun will work with all of the accessories that are already on the market. The magazines that I tried with the gun, I tried MBX, I tried Atlas, I tried the Duramags, and I tried the Checkmate magazines as well as the ones that came with it. Now, I just said a lot of things that you're gonna be like, he hates this gun. I don't hate this gun. I still think it's a pretty good gun. I think at $1,000, it's kind of right in line. I think that the Prodigy and the Live Free Armory Apollo probably outperform this gun out from the factory basis. And I ultimately think that y'all managed to overhype this gun on the internet. I don't think it's as good as everyone is saying it is. It's a good gun. It's just not as good as everyone on the internet makes it sound. So there's a good chance if you're watching this video, you're in the market for a gun around this price point. I did an affordable 2011 shootout video a couple weeks ago, and you can check that out here with some of the other options at that similar price point.